guys, and welcome back to my true crime channel. Today is going to be the last installment of the serial killer series that I started, and the reason that this one took a little bit longer is because this case has a lot more media coverage and information out there about this case since it is such an infamous case. So, as you saw by the title, today's case is going to be about Richard Ramirez, aka the Night Stalker. I think a lot of people have briefly heard about this case. I know that I had heard of it before. I didn't know as much about it as I obviously know now, but I think that it's really interesting to look at everything involved in the case. So just a brief overview, Richard Ramirez was an American serial killer who was convicted of murdering at least 13 people in California from the years 1984 to 1985. Let's start from the beginning. Ricardo Levia Munoz Ramirez was born on February 29, 1960 in El Paso, Texas, to parents Mercedes and Julian Ramirez. And something that I found really interesting was he was actually born on the day of a leap year. So leap years happen every 4 years, and that's when we get an extra day, so it's 366 days instead of 365. He was born on not only one of those years, a leap year, but he was also born on the day of the leap year. He was the youngest of 5 children. Mercedes and Julian were Mexican immigrants, and his whole family gave him the nickname Ricky from a young age. So Richard had a couple of very serious head injuries when he was young. One of the most substantial happened when he was 5 years old, when he got knocked unconscious by a swing. This caused him to develop epilepsy and start experiencing epileptic seizures, and this also led later to a long path of really heavy drug abuse. He also said in interviews, as well as his siblings, that his father Julian was incredibly abusive growing up, and he was the reason that some of the head injuries actually happened to Richard. Now, to escape spending time with his father, Richard would often spend time with his cousin, and his cousin's name was Miguel Ramirez. So when Richard was 12, Miguel, who was also a Vietnam War veteran, would give him marijuana, and then they would smoke together. While they smoked, Miguel would often show Richard photos of his time in Vietnam, but these were of Vietnamese women who he had allegedly sexually assaulted, tortured, and killed. A year after this, Richard also had to witness Miguel fatally shooting his own wife, Jessie, after they had gotten into an intense argument. So Miguel ended up actually being found not guilty by reason of insanity and was released after just 4 years in prison. After this run-in with the law with his cousin, Richard began breaking into people's homes, and he ended up dropping out of high school in just 9th grade after being charged with marijuana possession. And after this, he decided just to leave Texas, so he moved to Los Angeles, California. And soon after his move there, he was in prison for a short time for stealing a car. From there, everything started to escalate at a very quick and rapid pace. So on June 28th, 1984, Richard was only 24 years old at this time. He committed his first known murder against a 79-year-old widow named Jenny Vincow. Her son, Jack Vincow, went to visit Jenny's apartment, and he noticed that a window screen was missing, the front door was unlocked, and that all of her belongings were scattered across her entire home. He then found his own mother's body with multiple stab wounds throughout it. There was also evidence of sexual assault, and she actually had a slash so deep in her throat that she was nearly beheaded. After this first murder, he waited about 9 months before committing any more crimes just to make sure that he was in the clear for this first one. And then on March 17th, 1985, Richard attacked a young woman named Maria Hernandez, and she actually ended up being able to escape. However, she was in a car with her friend, Dale Okazaki, who was in the passenger seat. He did not end up being able to escape. He was unfortunately killed by Richard. And later that same night, the very same night, Richard claimed another victim named Sai Leon Yu. Now, most of his victims were from the Los Angeles area that he lived in, and some of his victims actually ended up surviving. His victims were often sexually assaulted and beaten. That was something that he did very often. And satanic symbols were often found at the scene of these crimes. Now, as these murders are coming out and the Night Stalker is becoming more known to these residents, especially in this area, there was a huge surge in gun sales at this time because people felt like they needed protection. They were scared that, especially because this guy seems to have no targets, he was just going for whoever he could find. That was really scary to people. And it also dawned on them that it could be them at any time. So everybody wanted to get as much protection as they could from the Night Stalker. So about a week after the two murders that I just talked about, Richard murdered two more people who were actually a couple. It was 64-year-old Vincent Zazzara and 44-year-old Maxine Zazzara. This attack was more aggressive and more brutal than the others, and they found that Maxine's eyes were actually gouged out. And after this attack is when Richard started to have more of a pattern when killing people, when he would carry out his attacks. So he would often shoot and kill the husband when breaking into the house, and then usually sexually assault and stab the wife. Sometimes he would also carve pentagrams into some of the people that he killed. The reason that he developed the name the Night Stalker was because he would often watch and stalk his victims for a few hours before actually attacking, and he would also carry out these attacks at night, in the middle of the night. The survivors of his attacks would go to the police and say what had happened to them, and the police were trying to draw up a composite sketch to figure out what this guy could look like based off of the survivor stories. And one of the things that the survivors would always point out about Richard was that he had rotten teeth. Later, they found out that high sugar consumption as well as excessive cocaine use is what led to pretty much all of his teeth just rotting. And something interesting to know about his pattern of victims is that he really didn't have a pattern. Like I said before, he went for anyone and everyone that he could find. Usually serial killers will have some kind of type, will have some kind of, even some serial killers that I've mentioned on this channel have had some kind of types, whether it be that they like a specific gender, a specific age group, a specific nationality, anything like that. Most serial killers do go after a certain type of person for one reason or another, but Richard Ramirez did not have that. He went for men and women alike. He sometimes would try to attack children. He never ended up killing any children, but sometimes he would try. He also would become really comfortable after killing someone. So it's not like he would feel remorse or feel the need to go and try and hide from, his crimes or try to evade the crime scene. Oftentimes, he would literally just search through the victims' fridges or pantries, and he would just eat snacks on their couch after he just murdered them. He would just sit there for hours just hanging out while their bodies are right there. Now, after his last murder, he slipped up a little bit and a fingerprint was actually found, and this is what led to Richard's identification, along with the fact that throughout all of these murders, he would always wear the same type of shoes, and he kept leaving footprints at these crime scenes. However, they couldn't track down the exact person that wore the shoes. They needed a little bit more evidence, but the shoe print definitely contributed along with the fingerprint to finding Richard. Now, on August 30th, 1985, which was only 6 days after his last known murder, police released the photographs and the name of Richard Ramirez, and they said, this is our guy. This is, if you see this man, he is wanted, heavily wanted. So, like, basically, the wanted posters, like, oh, if you see this man, turn him into the police or call the police. So just the very next day after posting these photos and releasing his name, a man in East Los Angeles actually saw Richard just walking around, and he called the police. So Richard realized this and tried to steal a car to run from the police. However, he was unsuccessful, and he started being surrounded by a crowd who was just full on beating him. Like, this crowd was trying to get their own justice. It's said that he actually sustained a couple of injuries from this. Not major injuries, but just a few bruises and scrapes because the crowd was actually beating him. Now, when police arrived, Richard, at 25 years old, was then arrested for this murder spree. As far as the trial, the whole trial is actually recorded, and I will leave a link to watch some of the trial in the description box if you guys are interested, because I always think it's interesting to watch how criminals act in trial. As far as Richard, sometimes we see similar behaviors with criminals when they are on trial and in court. Some people are very upset because they're trying to play the, I didn't do it card. They're trying to claim innocence, so they will just cry and act like it's the worst thing that's ever happened to them, being, charged for the crimes that they did. And then other times we have serial killers or criminals who know that they did it, are still trying to say not guilty, but know that they did it, and they just do not care. They will sit there laughing, they will sit there smiling, kind of just acting like, they're the shit. And Richard falls more into the latter category. He would just kind of smile, just kind of sit there. I don't know if you guys have ever seen clips of his trial where he would just kind of look around and smile, and he really did not care that he was getting charged for the murders of 13 people. So his trial started in early 1989, and only 2 months went by for the trial, and he was convicted of all 13 murders and was given 19 death penalties for these murders. And throughout the trial, along with just kind of laughing it off, Richard would also often make references to Satan, even going so far as to draw a pentagram on his palm. I don't know if you guys have ever seen those photos, but it's a really famous photo where he kind of sticks up his palm and there's just a pentagram on it. At the end of the trial, the judge stated that his crimes showed cruelty, callousness, and viciousness beyond any human understanding. But Richard never expressed any remorse for what he had done. Instead, when he was given the death penalty, his response was, "Big deal, death always went with the territory." And when asked what he thought of his conviction, he said that he didn't care about himself or what happened to him. This was also said in a interview that he did while on death row. He said that he could not care less, that he did not care that he was going to be sent to death. So while during his time on death row, he did only a couple of interviews, and he would never want to talk about his crimes. He would talk about the punishment he was given, or he would talk about serial killers in general, or he would talk about his past or things like that. He would never talk about why he committed the crimes. He would never talk about when, is there others. He would never give any details relating to the crimes. Even when asked point blank, why did you do these things? His response would often be, no comment. I don't have any comment. Now in prison, he actually befriended another inmate who was on death row for murder named Martin Kipp. And he opened up a little bit, saying that Richard confided in him a little bit more about his crimes, and that he had said that in order to feel satisfied sexually, Richard had to associate violence with sex, which we have seen in other serial killers who have to assault people or murder people. It's really sick. I don't know. And Richard actually responded to this and said that he had desires that were so strong that if he did not give in to them, they would crush him. Now, while waiting on death row at San Quentin prison, Richard was actually diagnosed with B-cell lymphoma and ended up dying due to complications from this diagnosis at Marin General Hospital in Greenbrae, California on June 7th, 2013. He was 53 years old, and he had actually been on death row for more than 23 years. And his last known words were, "I am beyond good and evil. I will be avenged. Lucifer dwells in us all." So that is the Night Stalker. I feel like there was actually, even though it's such an infamous case, I feel like there was actually less information out there because he himself never really admitted to anything, admitted any wrongdoing. Even, he never said that he was innocent of the crimes, and he knew that, like, everybody knew that he killed them, and he knew that everybody knew that he killed them, but he would never give an answer as to why, or what the motive was, or if he had any kind of pattern that he was following. And in the interviews that you watch with him, he kind of just writes this off and tries to just describe serial killers as a whole. And he would just say, well, I think a lot of things make a serial killer, you know, their childhood trauma, abuse, like upbringing, injuries, stuff like that, which in his case all might be true, since he did have a couple of head injuries growing up and he was abused. So it seems like that's what he attributes his psychoticness to. As we know from these serial killer cases, there's never really a reason other than the twisted reasons that they tried to manufacture in their minds. I hope you guys were interested to hear about the next Stalker case. I definitely learned more about Richard Ramirez than I knew going in. I had heard of him, but I didn't know a whole lot, or the extent of his crimes. I didn't know that that picture of like him with the pentagram on his palm, I did not know that was him. I knew that that was the serial killer, but I didn't know that was him. So it was interesting reading about him. And yeah, so my next true crime videos will be part of a new series. I have a pretty good idea of what series I want to do already, but if you guys have any ideas, please feel free to let me know. And please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed hearing me talk about these things, if you enjoyed hearing me talk about this case, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!